Malika ran. Her wounded feet sank into the filth of that cursed castle, while hungry shadows watched her escape. Behind her, the screams of tortured souls blended with the muffled laughter of something, or someone, who already knew her fate. But there was no escape. Each door led to more horrors. Every corridor hid eyes that never blinked. And at the end, a throne, a presence that waited patiently for her arrival, a judgment from which she could not flee. The castle was not just stone and darkness. It breathed, it felt, and it fed. Now, Malika stands before the one who rules this place. Her soul is no longer hers, but can she still fight? Or is this the end? Chapter 4. The Castle of Lost Souls. Malika tried to stay calm, but her mind was on the verge of exploding with the terror surrounding her. The darkness seemed to close in around her, and the creatures, with their deep, red eyes, watched her as if they knew exactly what she was thinking. Each step she took echoed like a silent scream in the empty, damp corridor, as if the very walls of the castle were listening to her pleas for help, without even considering the possibility of compassion. There was nothing there but endless, cruel torment. The doors, the corridors, the echoes, everything around her felt like an endless labyrinth, as if the castle itself had no intention of letting her escape. Every movement Malika made was being monitored, and she knew it. Every shadow, every heavy breath was being observed and calculated by beings whose glowing red eyes pierced through the darkness, ready to devour her. She moved down the corridor, growing more exhausted with each step, her feet wounded by the filthy, slippery ground. The creatures were not far behind. She could hear their dragging footsteps as if they were closing in, sensing her presence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But Malika couldn't stop. She couldn't let the paralysis of fear take over. She had to keep going. Her mind was torn between the instinct to flee and the desperate need to understand what was happening in this place. As she advanced, the foul stench grew stronger, a nauseating mix of decay and sulfur. The walls were covered in slick black moss, and the floor now felt as if it were shifting beneath her feet, as though something invisible was trying to consume her. What could be more horrific? What more had to happen for her to understand the true nature of this place? In the distance, she heard a sound, a muffled sound that made her stop instantly. It was like a whisper, a murmur of voices, but not human voices. The sound seemed to come from somewhere deep, far away, like a crowd in suffering. The voices grew louder, their intensity increasing, until they became piercing screams. Screams of agony, screams of tormented souls. As Malika approached the source of the sound, she found a massive door, forged from iron. The sound was coming from within. Without hesitation, she pushed against the door, feeling a shiver run down her spine. As it opened, the scene before her made her stomach churn. Inside the room, dozens of people were chained in massive iron restraints, their bodies tortured, torn apart, their souls consumed by eternal suffering. The room was dimly illuminated by a red glow, emanating from torches fixed to the walls, but the light was weak, almost sinister. The souls trapped there, unlike Malika, no longer seemed to have the strength to move. Their eyes were hollow, lost in the vastness of their torment. Malika felt a sharp pain in her chest, as though the sight before her was ripping her own soul apart, but she didn't have time to stop. The creatures were closing in again, and she knew she couldn't stay there. Without thinking, she ran across the room, trying not to look at the mutilated bodies or listen to the chorus of agony and suffering. The corridor ahead opened into a new space, a staircase spiraling upward. The stairs were her only option. She knew she couldn't stay, but she had no idea where they would lead. She climbed as fast as she could, feeling the weight of her body, the exhaustion, the fear. The creatures were now right behind her, and Malika's breaths grew shorter, her heart pounding at an unbearable speed. She had no idea what was happening, but she no longer had the strength to think. Each step she ascended took her farther from the tortured souls, but closer to something she didn't want to understand. Suddenly, The staircase stopped ascending, and Malika was thrown against the stone wall, collapsing onto the ground. Dizzy, she looked around and saw a door in front of her, one different from the others. But before she could move, the door swung open on its own. On the other side, Malika saw a colossal hall, illuminated by an eerie glow. The floor was covered in ashes, and at the far end of the room, a shadowy figure sat upon a throne. Its eyes were like voids, absorbing the very light from the room. It watched her with a cold intensity, as if it had been waiting for her. Malika tried to stand, but her legs were weak. She felt as if she were being pulled toward the figure, as if she had no way to escape. But before she could take another step, the door slammed shut behind her, and she was swallowed by the darkness of the hall. Chapter 5. The Final Judgment. Malika no longer knew what was real. Her vision was blurred by the smoke spreading through the castle, and the heavy air made it difficult to breathe. The room had now become the setting of a living nightmare, and eternity of darkness and muffled screams. She tried to stand, but exhaustion and panic consumed her. The walls around her seemed to close in, making the space even more claustrophobic. The throne ahead seemed to pull her gaze, an irresistible force compelling her to face the being seated there, watching her with a deadly calm. The figure on the throne did not move. Its deep red eyes seemed to stare directly into Malika's soul, as if it knew every thought, every fear she carried. It was judging her like a judge before a defendant. And now Malika felt there was no escape from this. Something inside her told her that she had been brought here for a dark purpose, something she did not want to understand, but could no longer ignore. With great effort, she tried to take a step toward the figure, but her legs trembled, and the pain of exhaustion nearly caused her to collapse with each movement. The creatures that once seemed like a distant presence were now slowly closing in, as if waiting for this moment to reach its conclusion. Malika could no longer run. Fate had caught up to her. The figure on the throne finally spoke, its deep, reverberating voice filling the room. "You have come this far, Malika. You came to me, to this moment. But every step you took was a choice. Now, it is time to face the consequences." The voice echoed like something ancient, something Malika could not comprehend but felt deep within her soul. The words resonated inside her as if the very castle was alive, with every stone, every shadow, and every scream becoming a part of her reality. She didn't know what those words truly meant, but in her heart, she knew this was the moment she had feared since the beginning. She was condemned. "You are no longer who you once were." The figure continued, its voice eerily calm. "You are no longer human. What remains of your soul is nothing more than a shadow of what it once was. And what you seek here, in my domain, is something even you cannot comprehend." A deep, bone-chilling cold spread through Malika's body. She looked at the creatures surrounding her. They were now closer, their towering forms waiting, as if for a command. She didn't know what to do, how to respond to those words, but something inside her screamed for her to fight, even if she had no strength left. She could not, under any circumstances, surrender to the fate the being on the throne had decreed for her. Without thinking, she took a step forward, defying the being and its judgment. The ground beneath her feet trembled, as if the very foundation of the castle was responding to her defiance. The creatures crept even closer, their red eyes glowing like lanterns in an endless night. The pressure in the air intensified, becoming unbearable. But Malika knew there was no turning back now. Then the figure on the throne slowly rose. Its form seemed to grow taller as it approached her until it loomed right before her. Its gaze was like a sharpened blade, piercing her mind, forcing her to confront her own demons. But Malika stood firm, staring back with a strength she hadn't even realized she still possessed. "You cannot escape your fate, Malika," the figure said with an icy smile. "You are mine now." Those words seeped into her mind like poison. A wave of despair and fear threatened to consume her, but at the same time, something inside her began to rise. She didn't know what it was nor where this strength was coming from, but it was there, pulsing within her flesh. She was no longer alone. No matter what she was about to face, she would not yield. In an act of pure willpower, she tried to pull away from the throne, sprinting toward the door she knew would lead her somewhere, anywhere. The creatures were almost upon her, and the figure on the throne watched without emotion. Desperation overtook her body, and fear made her movements sluggish, but she couldn't stop. Not now. With every step, the creatures lunged forward, their sharp claws reaching for her. But at the last moment, Malika hurled herself toward the door, pushing it open with every ounce of strength she had left. She didn't know what lay beyond, but she could no longer stay. Fear, despair, and pain became the fuel in her soul, something that propelled her forward without looking back. Chapter 6. The Impossible Escape. The air in the room grew heavier as Malika approached the door. The creatures around her stirred, their presence almost tangible, as if they were prepared to stop her escape at any cost. Fear consumed her, but she knew there was no other option. Either she moved forward or she would be swallowed by the darkness of this place. The screams of the lost souls echoed like a distant murmur, but they could no longer stop her. She had endured too much suffering, too much pain. She could not simply surrender now. As she finally reached the door, a deep growl rumbled from behind, making her legs falter. The figure on the throne now watched her in silence, its words cutting through the air like blades. "Do you think you can escape me? There is no way out, Malika. Everything you have found here is merely a reflection of what you have become, the Four." Words reverberated in her mind, but she ignored them, forcing her hands to push against the door. The sound of metal scraping against stone was deafening, as if the castle itself was protesting her attempt to flee. But with one final effort, the door gave way, and Malika found herself in a dark corridor, illuminated only by torches burning, along the walls casting distorted shadows that danced as if trying to consume her soul. She ran. It didn't matter where, as long as it was away from the castle, away from all those horrors. But as she moved through the endless corridors, she realized that the doors around her were all locked. There were no more spiraling staircases, no windows through which she could escape. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the sound of footsteps echoed throughout the space, growing louder with every passing second. The castle, as if alive, now seemed to mock her desperate attempt to flee. The sounds of the creatures approaching intensified, and Malika could feel their presence. Behind her, shadows stretched across the walls, reaching out like claws trying to grasp her. Every step she took was a desperate effort, but the castle would not let her go. The weight of her situation was crushing, but she knew she couldn't stop. She couldn't give in. Suddenly, a door to her right creaked open, and Malika rushed. Inside, finding herself in a dimly lit room, its glow almost otherworldly. The space was more elegant than the other parts of the castle she had seen, but there was something sinister about its beauty. The floor was covered with red and gold carpets, and at the center stood an ancient table adorned with candles and glass vials resembling an altar. But the stench in the room was unbearable. It was the stench of death. Malika didn't know what to do. She felt compelled to approach the table, drawn by something she couldn't understand. But before she could take a step, a shadow emerged in front of her. A creature larger than any she had encountered materialized out of nowhere. Its eyes gleamed like rubies, and its skin appeared to be made of a liquid substance reflecting the flickering flames of the room. The creature opened its mouth, and a deep voice filled with rage and contempt thundered, "You think you can escape? This place is not for you. You are already a part of it, Malika. There is no return, no salvation." The words struck her like a blow, but she could no longer listen. She only wanted to get out, to escape this cursed place. Malika stepped back, but the creature advanced, blocking her only exit. She didn't know what to do. Her body was exhausted, but the will to survive still burned within her. Without thinking, she lunged to the side, dashing toward the only other door in the room. As she pushed it open, a blast of wind hit her, sending a chill through her body that made her stumble. But she didn't stop. She stepped through the doorway and found herself in a long corridor, different from the others. There was a light at the end, faint but enough to ignite a sliver of hope. Malika felt that the exit was close, but the weight of the darkness surrounded her, as if everything in this place was against her. The creatures began to appear once more, emerging from the shadows, their red eyes reflecting the torchlight. She knew she was out of time. The staircase was in sight, but the creatures were closing in, tightening their grip around her escape. And then she noticed something. It wasn't the staircase she remembered. It was taller, steeper, as if it led to the very depths of hell. Malika hesitated for a brief moment. What awaited her at the top? Salvation or eternal damnation? But she had no choice. She ran. The staircase seemed endless, spiraling higher and higher into the unknown. The screams and howls of the creatures followed her, but Malika didn't look back. She had to reach the top. She had to get out, or die trying. Finally, as she reached the summit, she was met with an enormous iron door, engraved with strange symbols. Malika placed her hand on the handle, hesitated for a moment, and then, with all her remaining sane, the darkness closes in around Malika. Each step she takes echoes in the tomb-like silence of the castle. The weight of destiny hangs over her shoulders, and fear is a tangible presence. But now there's nowhere left to run. She has faced unimaginable horrors. She's seen tortured souls, heard screams echoing through eternity, and felt the unrelenting gaze of the creature on the throne pierce her soul. The Castle of Lost Souls wasn't just a prison. It was a distorted reflection of hell itself. But something within her still cries for freedom. And then she runs. The shadows chase her. The creatures move across the walls, their eyes glowing like live embers. With each corridor she travels, with each door she opens, the promise of freedom slips further away. But there's something ahead. One last chance. One last door. Malika knows this could be her only way out, but where does it really lead? And this is where our story for today ends. But this is just a part of the nightmare. What awaits Malika beyond that door? Will she finally find freedom, or just a new torment? Before the darkness reaches us, subscribe to the channel now. Turn on notifications to be alerted as soon as the next episode is released. Leave a like, comment on what you've thought so far. But be careful, someone or something may be listening. Malika's story is far from over, and believe me, the worst is yet to come. And now tell me, if you were in Malika's place, would you have the courage to cross that door until the next episode? If you dare to return.